Counselor, you're playing a hot hand when it comes to predictions. So, SCOTUS, you in your role as Katz, which is what we call you when you make these predictions or we ask you for some kind of forecast, you were right about the Lisa Cook thing. SCOTUS actually saying, you, Mr. President, we will figure out whether you have the power to fire the Fed governor, but meantime, she will remain on the job. So, Katsadamas, you can take that as a victory. You said that would happen. And you also said Jimmy Kimmel will be back on the air, notwithstanding what the FCC commissioner is saying and notwithstanding what the Sinclair and Nexstar stations are doing. Kimmel will be back within the week, you said, and you were right about that. So,
unfortunately, I was also right that they would indict Comey a couple of days before they did, because I just thought with the willfulness of Trump, his vindictiveness, and the fact that U.S. attorney there who'd been approved by Congress, that he resigned. It was pretty clear it was because he would not sign the indictment and that Trump was going to send somebody in there, anybody with a law degree, anybody, whether they had any prosecutorial or criminal defense experience or not, just send somebody in there to be the puppet and to sign the indictment. She may not have signed the indictment or presented it properly, but I also predicted that was going to happen. If I could just take 1 minute about Cook, the reason I felt very strongly that the Supreme Court was not going to use the emergency docket to remove her was that the district court had not removed her. The D.C. Circuit Court 2-1 had not removed her. And by the way, the remarkable thing that it was 9-0. So you think about the person that Trump put on the D.C. Circuit, the person who would have removed her during the pendency of the litigation, how incredibly Trumpy and right-wing that judge is. He has a name similar to mine, and I will not give him further publicity by mentioning it. But you think that there was a district judge, 3 circuit judges, 9 justices on the Supreme Court. If my addition's right, that's 13 in all. So 12-1. But Trump had actually picked somebody, and he's picked them for other circuit courts around the country, who was actually willing to do his bidding and remove her. I thought they weren't going to remove her because it is not the Supreme Court's job on the emergency docket to go around and find every supposedly erroneous decision in the United States, Mark, from an appellate court, and to cure it right away with the emergency docket. Interesting thing about this case is they have expedited it, but only to January. They could have put it like the tariff case right at the beginning of the docket. They haven't done that. They've expedited it to January. And can we talk about this for just a minute? I know there's so much other breaking news, but there have been some people from these commissions, like the Federal Trade Commission, some of the other commissions, the Merit Board, the one that if you're a whistleblower or you're wrongly fired, that you go in front of, where you're supposed to have an impartial hearing. But again, all of these boards now are majority Republican, Mark. So on some of them, Trump has removed the Democratic member. Congress said there can't be more than 3 members of one party. Congress, in setting up these independent agencies, has basically said that they should be 3-2 Democrats and Republicans. You know, there are no real minority parties in this country that command 20% of the vote. And so it's Democrats and Republicans. And so they have allowed the removal during the pendency of the litigation, Mark, of someone at, I think, the Federal Trade Commission, someone from one of the merit boards. And they said in one of those decisions, which did not involve a Federal Reserve governor, that maybe Federal Reserve governors are different. But what I think, and I haven't heard this anywhere, Mark, so I'm going to break some news and make some opinions, and your viewers and our audience can tell me that I'm full of it, or they can tell me they think it's a good idea. But I think that there are about 3 people involved. There's 2 people who are not Federal Reserve governors, and then there's her. And yes, she has an incredibly strong case. She hasn't gotten due process. I don't think that this is proper cause. I don't think that she's done anything wrong. You put all that together. But there is a risk in all these cases that this Supreme Court will say, Mark, that there's a unitary executive. There is a chance that they will strike down all of these boards. And I don't see the reasoning, if they strike down under the unitary executive theory, that they can strike down the EPA as a board, gone. The president can do whatever he wants about the environment, and Congress can legislate, but he can execute the laws any way he wants to, with or without a Federal Trade Commission, with or without an EPA. I don't see how it's different for the Federal Reserve. I know that investors will freak out. I know that the really rich people are not with Trump on this one. He'll start printing money like they do in third world countries where there's not a strong institution like the Fed, and they'll screw up the economy, not just for poor people like he has been. He'll start screwing up the economy for rich people and for long-time savers and so forth. But I'm really worried that they will strike down all of these boards, including the Federal Reserve, and this logic will go all the way through. And I'm really scared that there's 3 Trump-picked justices and the 6 Republicans out of only 9, 6 Republicans to 3. I'm worried that they will allow, Mark, a Republican president to have this power. And so I think that after the argument, especially after they see how the argument goes in January, I think all of those 3 or 4 officials should resign. I know that's controversial, but I think they should resign, make these disputes moot, and not allow the U.S. Supreme Court to rule on it. I think that what should happen is that when the Democrats win in 3 years, and I'm more and more confident that we'll have a Democratic president, of course, this has set a precedent, that the Democratic president will remove the Republican members of those boards. The Democratic president will remove Republican from the Federal Reserve governing board, and then that'll be the time to challenge it. And then we'll see if the U.S. Supreme Court 6-3 really does want to strike down all these boards and say they don't exist, and there's a unitary executive, when that means a Democratic president will be able to do whatever the Democratic president wants to do. And if there's a unitary executive, Mark, what that means is that there really would be no EPA or FTC or Federal Reserve as we know it. There'd be a bunch of cronies of the president, and they would run the thing. And the minute that he didn't like their decision, the minute Trump didn't like their decision, he would fire all of them. There wouldn't be an Administrative Procedure Act that really meant anything. There wouldn't be any independent agencies as we understand them. And you might say, well, my God, they won't strike down a 100-year-old precedent, this famous Humphreys executor. What do you mean they won't? To the extent that they have said that on the merits, it's likely that the president will win. That means on the merits, they think it's likely that there are no independent agencies.
Sure. That you make a really good argument. I also see ways in which, the FEC is something that they can completely erase as well, the Federal Election Commission. So when you talk about, I think that, you and I come at this question of the next election from different directions. I see every manner in which the next election, general election, don't know about the midterms, but the general election for the presidency will be undermined in so many different ways. Look at the ways that, that they slapped together in the 2020 election. And now they'll have all this additional time, and the plans are already being laid. So all I'll say is, sure, if the Democrats regain power, as you suggest they might, and maybe even likely will, at least in your narrative, then you have some leverage. But I think there's a lot of real estate between here and there. I don't know. These
Mark, let me just express my thought, because I'm very excited about the fact that the redistricting here in California looks like it's going to win. I think with that, we can counteract the power grab that Trump
has in Congress, in the midterms.
In Texas. And so I think that we'll more or less have a balance. Yes, they'll gain some seats in Texas. We'll gain some seats in California. It'll be just about like the status quo is now. And I just see the Republicans losing overwhelmingly. They do generally in the midterm, right? And Trump is so unpopular. He's alienated so many groups. So I see the Congress going, if not the Senate, I see the House going Democratic. I think there's an awful lot that they can do. I think they can bolster election fairness. The election in 2028 is largely in the states. I know they can do a lot of things. You couldn't even give somebody a cup of water while they waited in a 3-hour line in Georgia. I get that Trump will do all sorts of things. He'll try to disqualify voters. Vance will be his willing accomplice and henchman and all of that. But I just think he'll be unpopular enough in 2028. There'll be a Democratic victory. And my point, and then I'll drop this about the boards. And she's 1 vote out of 7. So if the oral argument in the U.S. Supreme Court goes poorly, and you can pretty much guess, that's one of the reasons I have such a high percentage on guessing the Supreme Court, is I'm usually guessing after the oral argument, not with the tariffs. You and I have
we're going to get to that. We're going to get to that.
Case. But I just think that it'll be after the oral argument, it'll be clear enough which way they're going, that if they're going for the unitary executive. She's 1 vote out of 7. I think she says, I haven't done anything wrong with the better part of valor. I'm going to make this moot. And we're going to see how this all plays out. We're going to see if this U.S. Supreme Court, 6-3 Republican, is really going to get rid of that 100-year-old precedent when it gives a lot more power to a Democratic president. Not right now, when they can just shabbily give more power to a Republican president. That's exactly what we're expecting from SCOTUS, and that's exactly what they may do. These are the authors of presidential immunity.
Well, I'll just remind you also that when they ruled on presidential immunity, they did so while who was president?
Well,
Biden.
Mark, that's a great point. But they see one of the things is that the Republicans have been, they think that they're playing with one-way money. The one-way money is they always think the decency and the respect for the rule of law among the Democrats is so strong that they'll never get paid back in their own coin. They know very well, these Republican senators right now, the reason they're not checking Trump when Trump goes through every mortgage file of just the enemies of Trump, they know very well that when the Democrats get back in power, they're not going to go through the mortgage file or the IRS returns of every single prominent Republican. Could they, based on this precedent? Absolutely. They've been so spineless, Mark. You could just say, you know, they were spineless about it. We're going to be spineless about it. This is the new norm in America, that every political enemy has their mortgage file and their IRS return scrutinized by the party in power. That's just the way it is. You Republican senators, House members deal with it. But they know that the Democrats are not going to do that. Now, you might have somebody really ruthless come to power. They said Bobby Kennedy, not this one, the daddy, was really ruthless. I don't remember the politics well enough, but people always complain how ruthless he was. And you could have a president who was ruthless in the sense that they would do very much what the Republican senators, Congress members are allowing Trump to do. You might very well have a Democrat who just, that was their, you know, they were Bobby Kennedy, as he's reputed to be. They were an LBJ, as he was reputed to be. But they don't expect to be paid back with their own coin, which is one reason why they don't rein in these outrages that Trump perpetrates day after day against Democrats.
Yeah, I mean, you know, just because you mentioned Bobby Kennedy, the dad, I'll just say that, you know, that's one of the things that people point to when they're talking about, don't tell me about the attorney general being in the tank for Trump when JFK appointed his brother, Bobby, as, you know, the attorney general during that administration. Sort of like Democrats have shown the ability to, you know, birds of a feather, you know, put them together type thing in their own administrations. Now, I mean,
Mark, one last thing. I don't remember Bobby Kennedy going after Democrats or Republicans or JFK. You know, I don't remember the era that well. He went after the supposedly, let's say, the mob ruthlessly. That's not a bad thing to go after the mob.
No, he went after the mob, and he went after
when they shot him and his brother, right? If you believe
segregationists. I mean, it was there were it was a different. And I was just about to say, it really can't hold a candle to what we're seeing today. But you know, again, if you just read the headline, you know, JFK appoints RFK, then you don't get to what you've just talked about. I want to ask you about. Look, to me, the Justice Department is an arm, a legal arm of this president. They've shown it. Bondi's shown utter fealty. They'll cook up whatever the president wants them to cook up. And you mentioned it earlier in our conversation when you talk about what they've done with Comey and Halligan, who is not even a prosecutor, put in the position of prosecuting this case against Comey when the Republican prosecutor said, I'm not going to do it. There's just not enough evidence here of a criminality. So I can't bring this case, and I'm not going to. Ultimately, he was forced out, and this insurance lawyer for Trump was brought in. So it brings me to my question. Is there a way in which, or might there be, disbarment of someone like Lisa Halligan, again, who was just brought in as a hatchet person to execute this Comey indictment, even though it's not underpinned by any sort of real fact?
Oh, absolutely. You know, John Mitchell is a famous person of yesteryear with that common name, but he was the attorney general under Nixon. He went to the federal penitentiary. He'd been the attorney general. And sure, there's all these violations of the law, obstruction of justice, and so forth. And I think that, you know, Bondi, Kash Patel are looking right in the eye of going to prison themselves. They obviously think that they're going to get a pardon from Trump on Trump's way out. But those things don't always work out. They could be in contempt of court. There's some power by federal judges to punish a contempt of court, even appoint a lawyer, distinguished member of the bar to prosecute. That is one thing that the judiciary can prosecute, despite the separation of powers, a contempt on that court. So that could certainly be one thing. Some of these things are state violations. I keep saying on your show, the state needs to get more involved in some of those things. And you saw what happened with Trump. Trump has his presidential immunity, according to SCOTUS, 6 votes on SCOTUS at least. And of course, they can do whatever they want to, whether it's right or it's wrong. It's right because 6 of them or 5 of them did it out of the 9. And they did it. They gave the president immunity. They didn't give anybody else immunity. There's no way you can stretch that decision to say anybody but Trump got immunity. Patel didn't get it. Bondi didn't get it. And of course, all these minions, these puppets, like this lady that they just sent into court. One thing, it was kind of a Saturday Night Live version of what happened. I mean, what we know about it, it's very hard to find out about the grand jury. There are grand jury secrecy laws, but a lot of people are talking about what happened. Some of those things happened in open court. So you asked me one day about, won't they indict a ham sandwich? Because I used that expression. And I said, well, they won't indict a completely rotten ham sandwich. And apparently many of the grand jurors thought this was a completely rotten ham sandwich against Comey. So I had to actually look at it. There are 23 members on a grand jury. There has to be a certain quorum of them. And it turns out you have to have a majority vote. I think when I was a prosecutor, it was 23-0. I don't think anyone ever dissented from one of the indictments, because you're the only one in the room and you believe in the case and you and the agent explain it to the case, and they vote a true bill, as it's called. Apparently, there was 14 out of 23, Mark.
So it just barely made it.
The grand jury. 14 out of 23. So 9 of the people there, with only the government explaining their side of the story, still thought there was no side of the story that they should indict Comey for. Apparently, a majority decided on count 1 that count 1 was garbage. So they wouldn't indict on the proposed count 1. They did 14-9 vote an indictment, a true bill, on 2 and 3, and that left her this insurance lawyer that Trump
Lisa Halligan, I think is her name, yeah.
Hannigan or Halligan, to do the dirty deed. So she goes in to do the dirty deed. This is an unusual situation. She's got a 3-count indictment and 1 count's not returned. So apparently she signs 2 different things, and she may not have signed the right thing the right way. And if she didn't sign the right thing the right way, it's no good, because the statute of limitations has now run. So any defect, even a technical defect, can't be cured right now, because if a grand jury return now is untimely, it's too late. So I said last week, I think it was, that I thought it was 50-50. There were 2 things that were about equally probable. One was 50-50, the judge would throw out the indictment. And it may be a little bit more than 50-50 now that the judge will throw out the indictment for these technical violations and just other things like that. It's also possible that it will be thrown out for selective prosecution, but that one will be fraught. The Trump administration will appeal that, and who knows what SCOTUS will do with that, because selective prosecution is much harder to prove than it ought to be. We all look at this and we know this is selective prosecution. They say, only somebody with a law degree and sitting on the U.S. Supreme Court can somehow figure out why this is not selective prosecution in the case of Trump and Comey.
Well,
and
he stipulated in writing that this is what he wanted, was this indictment. The president of the United States, it seems pretty demonstrable. I want to quickly move to the crackdown on domestic.
One last thing, if you don't mind, one last thing. He didn't whisper this in someone's ear. He sent out a tweet, right? An X, to tens of millions of people. I thought the other 50-50 chance was that he would go to trial and the jury would find him not guilty. At the very least, they would hang. I mean, the jury's not going to find him guilty 12-0 beyond a reasonable doubt. And they say in the reporting that he wants a trial, Mark. And I will tell you something, from my dozens of years in federal criminal defense, nobody wants a trial. Anyone who says they want a trial, they don't. They'd rather have the case dismissed and sleep at night, sleep soundly at night, and not risk a trial. Even if you're Comey, no matter how weak the case is, he will make those motions and try to win on those motions, not just drive the case rapidly to trial.
Well, as I've said repeatedly here, I mean, you don't want a trial. You don't want even an investigation from the federal government. Even if you're James Comey, it can drive you to bankruptcy. It can ruin your life. It can ruin your marriage. It can ruin your family. It can just, it's a destructive, big bowl of awfulness. And so, of course, as you say, David, he doesn't want it to continue. And I just would say this, that, I mean, you make some really compelling points, and, you know, you really note the law here in a big way. I personally, in a way, don't care what happens to James Comey. I mean, James Comey to me is a bit villainous, honestly, in American history for what he did with the declaration of the reopening of the Hillary Clinton case about her emails and making that announcement 10 days before an election that was settled by like 48,000 votes. So but what happens with the rule of law is incredibly relevant to the rest of us, and the idea somehow that you can just tee up whatever case you want and the president demands, that's incredibly important. So from that standpoint, we watch with interest. But I wanted to ask you about something else, if I could please, about an executive order that was drafted. It was a memo on speech. Trump talking about domestic terrorism. This is again sort of in the shadow of the Charlie Kirk murder. Trump talking about domestic terrorism without really a definition of what it is. He's talking about speech by individuals and organizations opposed to the Trump administration's policies. And he's talking about also what was wrapped up in the Kimmel decision and what he views as sort of hateful, negative rhetoric toward the administration. And the things they are doing, this is a quote, "I haven't seen government actions like this in my lifetime," said a deputy litigation director for First Amendment policy teachings at Columbia University. The most recent analogies would be either from Nixon or the Red Scare. So again, this memo starts by linking political assassinations of Kirk and Brian Johnson, the CEO of United Healthcare, to somehow the hate speech associated with domestic terrorism, as the president puts it. And all of it is left-wing speech. Can you speak to this? It strikes me as incredibly relevant to the No Kings protests that are coming up, and to all the kinds of dialogues and discourses that we're having right here on our show.
Well, I think it's incredibly important. I think the good news is that the targets are people who have money and influence and who can defend themselves. I don't see Trump going after what they call the lonely pamphleteer. I don't see him going after, podcasts and things like that. He wants to go after the major media markets. He wants to go after people like George Soros, who shouldn't have to be in this situation, but is someone who can afford to defend himself. So I think a lot of those people that he wants to target are big boys and girls who can, take care of themselves, hire good lawyers. And I think he'll get nowhere in terms of the context. This idea that there's this, quote, hate speech because people disagree with you and that you want to term it hate speech. I mean, he's now, of course, he's living in the same world, but he wants to deny the world that he lives in. The world that he lives in, Laura Ingraham and Sean Hannity go on TV every single night to a huge audience and have this complete spin, to be polite about it, on the news. The Fox shows that I go on, either they have me on as the foil and I try to give the whatever the liberal moderate point of view back if they'll let me get a few words in, and Fox basically wouldn't. So that's why I'm on News Nation, because they'll let me explain my side of the story. But Fox has those presenters I'm talking about have a totally skewed view of things. And there are these even more far out right-wing stations that have even a much more view of things. And certainly their statements toward DEI, toward all kinds of other things, you could certainly term them hateful. Certainly somebody could go after them. Biden could have gone after them. And there are instances of how Biden supposedly and his administration went after free speech are ridiculous. They talk about this one thing with the COVID and all that kind of stuff. And again, there was a compelling interest in what Biden was trying to do to not have disinformation go out, rattle out there and get people all upset on false news. You could publish real news to the extent they have anything at all. That they had some of the tech companies not have as wide dissemination of basically false information as they did. That's their example of the free speech. And so they're just, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Biden, you go back to the Obama administration, you go back to Clinton, no Democratic administration did this. There were some things under W that I thought were, the Patriot Act, some of the things that he did. Certainly he was no friend of free speech. But there really has been nothing like what Trump's trying to do. But the good news is I don't think he'll get away with it. As Jimmy Kimmel said, I got dismissed because of my low ratings. Look at me now. Look at my ratings now. And, ABC and what's it, the other station should have done the same thing. But, ABC and Disney, they want to take over this NFL thing. And the NFL, they figure, is where the money is. The legacy media really needs, live sports to get people to watch the live TV that they sell. And so ABC's desperate for a deal. When Trump says, oh, I got Slopadopoulos to pay $15 million on account of Slopadopoulos, George Stephanopoulos made a little error. And they probably had discovery and records that were going to come out that he was told not to say that Trump had been found guilty of something. He was found guilty of something really bad, but not as bad as what Stephanopoulos said. And they probably had memos saying, don't say double X. And he said double X, and he should have just stuck to the X that Trump had actually been found liable or guilty. Now I'm going to get myself in trouble.
Well, more to the broader point you're making. The fact is, CBS wanted the Paramount deal. Paramount wanted the Skydance deal, or I think it was Skydance. Maybe Skydance is the TikTok. Anyway, it's that merger. They wanted approval. They needed government approval. As you say, Disney wants the acquisition of the NFL network. They need government approval. So you have all of these outlets and networks that are part of big companies that need the government for some kind of approval, either mainstream FCC or Justice Department. And so in a way, Trump's got them over a barrel. And throw in a dash of the Nexstar stations needing government approval for the number of stations they can have in their network of stations that they own across America. They needed that restriction lifted, and they need government approval. So they were all too happy to play ball. They take Kimmel off the Nexstar station. Sinclair, which is right wing, takes Kimmel off of their network of stations. And that's how you get it. It's got nothing to do, in a way, with Kimmel. It's got to do with the demands of the president and the power of government.
Well, Nexstar, let me say this because I'm on News Nation. It's owned by Nexstar. So I'll say this whether I'm on Nexstar's News Nation or not. They and Sinclair are trying to get too high a concentration of stations. Traditionally, the amount of market penetration that they'll then have if these deals are approved, they should not be approved. And so part of the reason that they're kissing the FCC's and Trump's butt is because they want an approval that they probably should be denied. But as to all of these approvals, you can go to court. But of course, it's more fraught and risky to go to court, even with great lawyers, than it is to just suck up to Trump to do his bidding and to have Brendan Carr approve your deal, which, by the way, Brendan Carr approved the deal for Paramount, or whoever was in the administration approved the deal for Paramount. It looks like they really need Brendan Carr for that Sinclair and that Nexstar deal, and it looks like they're going to get it by giving.
Well, and the court and going to court, as you suggest, takes time. It's uncertain, and they'll find other ways. Now you're in an adversarial footing legally with the government. They'll find other ways to F you over. I mean, it's a fact. I wanted to just mention,
Mark, that happened with some of those law firms. I just want to say that too. I'm no friend of those huge 10 law firms. I think it's all of the top 10 law firms, the ones that make billions of dollars in revenue. Just think of them as any other corporations. They want to show the world a little pro bono. They want to get the idealistic top law students to go join their law firms. They are not pro bono institutions. It may be law, the rule of law. That's all very nice. These are enormous money-making firms, billions of dollars, partners who make over $10 million year in and year out. Do they want to make half of that money, only $6 or $7 million a year, to fight for the rule of law, to do the right thing? No. So a lot of them didn't stand up to Trump. But from another point of view, just from the lawyer point of view, if you're one of those law firms, they don't want to be on the wrong side of the administration, because the next thing, they represent a Paramount. Here's a law firm representing a Paramount. I'm just saying, from a business point of view, given that they're not charitable institutions, whatever law firms want you to believe, they're not, most of them are not public interest. They're not public interest law firms. They're huge profit making law firms. And they want to be able to tell clients honestly that they're the best lawyer for them, no matter who's in office. And right now, Trump is in office. So it's very depressing with the law firms, like it's depressing with Paramount and some of the other ones. But, and of course, he's willing to use that power. There's been a norm that presidents stand back from that. I don't think Biden used his power that way. I was in the Reagan administration. I didn't really get involved in media things. I was a prosecutor, federal prosecutor under the Reagan administration. But I don't think that Reagan did this sort of thing. Reagan had his own, Reagan, the tax rate, he gave millionaires an enormous tax break. And you can certainly argue that. And he was really bad on some other issues. But he did not. You cannot imagine Reagan doing what Trump.
Well, no, this is unprecedented. You can fill in the blank. You can play Mad Libs with this. The fill in the blank president didn't have do anything like this, and it could be the worst president that you can concoct for that Mad Libs. But the other thing I just wanted to say, two things on the law firms to which you've referred. They are doing pro bono work for the Heritage Foundation. The Heritage Foundation doesn't need pro bono work done for it. A Heritage Foundation is insanely wealthy. Hundreds of millions of dollars they have. They don't need...
How about the Commerce Department? Mark, how about the Commerce Department? They're doing work for the Commerce Department. And you wonder, what is this work? Doesn't Commerce hire its own lawyers? It does hire its own lawyers. Are they learning secrets by being there? That's why it's so important that the House go Democratic, that somebody take a look. I think... some of these huge firms over there, what are they doing working for the, are they learning things about our trade policy? Are they learning these tariffs? Are they getting inside information? I don't mean to malign anybody, but that's the sort of thing when you hear that enormous law firms are doing pro bono work at the Commerce Department, forget the Heritage Foundation, you think, what is the point of this? What are they really doing? I mentioned
the Heritage Foundation because they're an extreme right-wing group that is incredibly wealthy. They don't need pro bono work done by these law firms that have been completely cowed by this administration. And now there's a new lawsuit. New York AG Letitia James filing a lawsuit, and this is an emergency motion seeking a temporary restraining order against the U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, and her department, accusing them of unlawfully withholding. This is a huge deal, David Katz. $34 million in funding that was requested by the state's Metropolitan Transit Authority, the MTA of New York. They are the state agency that operates the New York City subway, the buses, the commuter rail lines. They serve nearby suburbs. So she filed in U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York an emergency order by midnight to safeguard the MTA's funding. Department of Homeland Security, they're seeing a way they can leverage against this democratically controlled area, which is New York, all of this money that comes from the feds, $34 million. A lot of it was designed and earmarked for major commuter improvements around in and around New York City.
Well, I think that they got an emergency order that the DHS cannot do anything else with that money. I think they got an emergency order that money has to be preserved so it can be given to New York for those purposes if New York wins that lawsuit. But this is, we talk about all these things like rescission, we talk about the separation of powers, and people may think it's kind of abstract. This is a perfect example. After 9/11, Congress decided to vote this money to improve these things so that 9/11 wouldn't create disasters like that. A whole subway station collapsed under the building. People were killed down in the subways. This was to make improvements so that any kind of terrorist attack on New York would create a lot less havoc and loss of life, right? The money was earmarked for that purpose. That's what it's being spent on. That's what this administration, because they want to retaliate against the Democratic enclave. And it's not just a retaliation against New York, it's retaliation against James. They knew that she was going to defend it. So it's another chance to go fight with James again. Remember, she's the one who won that huge judgment against Trump that he has to pay hundreds of millions of dollars. Believe it or not, the amount was then vacated by the state Court of Appeals, and Trump doesn't have to pay it. But anyway, it's another fight with James, which of course Trump relishes as part of the revenge tour. And it looks like that money will be paid out. And think what an outrage it could be after Congress on a bipartisan basis and the president signed that bill, and that money is earmarked for New York for those purposes to make New York less susceptible, less dangerous to terrorist attack. And now to have it withheld and spent on what, ICE? To send ICE troops around to to more farms and to more construction sites.
And that's what it's
That's
about.
the
Yeah, it's
money's gonna
about
get
just
spent on.
that. Right.
That's
It's
what it's
about,
going to get spent on, and not on protection for New York City against terrorist attack. And
so
I think the judge is not going to allow that. And so far, I think, Mark, you can check it, but I think the judge has already said they have to preserve that money so it gets spent for what Congress and the former president said in the bill it should be spent for.
Sure. Meantime, it came in that huge infrastructure bill. But meantime, projects are being stopped down. I mean, they're major. They're infrastructure projects, and they're being shut down because this money is being. So again, now you have to go to court, even in an emergency way, and you have to get a judgment. It's a real issue. Wow, David, I'm out of time. I feel like I don't know. I wanted to let me just touch on tariffs real quick.
Sure.
Just review for us what your prediction is on tariffs. SCOTUS is going to pick up tariffs. By the way, let me just mention that there have been, because I know you like to do this, talk about the fact that Trump is being rebuffed in various ways. The VOA, Voice of America ruling I thought was significant. The ruling that you can't shut down Voice of America. What's her name? Carrie Lake, who runs the company that sort of handles the government company that handles the sub-company Voice of America, can't fire all that staff, almost 600 people. They have to rehire them, and that Voice of America can't be touched. So that was a huge legal victory for Voice of America.
Real quick, Mark. I know the judge in that case, Royce Lamberth. He's a senior judge, I think, by now. I think he's over 80, but he goes back to the era when I clerked for the chief judge there in Washington, D.C. A lovely person. A rock-ribbed Reagan Republican. Imagine what he thinks about something like this. VOA, Voice of America, since the time that we were fighting Nazi propaganda, then it was to fight Soviet propaganda, to give our view of the world, anti-authoritarianism, liberty, all that kind of stuff. And again, mind-boggling that Trump wants to cut back the Voice of America that's proud of our achievements, proud of our liberty. Why? I mean, the people who think like it's more like we're not fighting the Russians anymore. Trump's joined the Russians. I mean, what a great example that is to cut back Voice of America. And I think the statute's quite clear that it cannot perform its statutory mission without that money. And so the judge said, no, Congress set it up to perform its statutory mission, and that's what I wanted to do, and they can't do it without the money. What's your other thing about tariffs?
Well, by the way, that's as inexplicable as stopping USAID. That's soft power that really matters around the world. I mean, that I put that in the same category as the I'll just say it, propaganda, good propaganda kind of, that VOA oftentimes was part of in the post-World War II America. I wanted to ask you about the tariffs. Where do you see the tariff thing, and how do you see the tariff thing coming down? They are going to pick up this question of tariffs at the Supreme Court level. Are they legal? Is the question that they are going to pick up?
Well, my streak, and this is for your producer. This may be where Pete Rose doesn't get the hit. I'm on my Katz good hit streak. I've had so many right in a row. Believe me, I'm going to hear about it when I get one wrong. So I'm going to toot my own horn when I've gotten so many right in a row. But you and I disagree on tariffs, and I still think that the case comes from this international court that said that the tariffs were illegal because it's not an emergency. Then it went to an appeals court that hears these specialized kind of cases, and these experts on tariffs and what's constitutional and legal and not said 7-4 that Trump's tariffs were illegal, and they struck them down. It's a bit troubling that court and the U.S. Supreme Court has allowed them to still be collected during this interim, but the Supreme Court has put the tariffs argument in the U.S. Supreme Court on an expedited schedule. So it'll be heard, I think, within the next month. Maybe it's less than a month from now. I think they'll rule promptly after that. And I think that they will say that there's no emergency. Trump claims that he has this emergency power, and it doesn't have to be handled by Congress, which has power over taxes and tariffs. But in this emergency, and the emergency is supposed to be that drugs are coming into the country. Well, drugs have been coming in for a while, and they've actually going down in the last year. So that can't be the emergency this year, with drugs going down this year. And the other is that we have a trade imbalance, which we've had for decades. So neither one being an emergency, I think that the U.S. Supreme Court's going to say about 7-2 that it is not an emergency. It will go back to Congress. Congress will make their own deals with all these countries Some will pay more, some will pay less, but it won't be an arbitrary thing where Trump or any president can shake people down. This is not the way to run foreign policy, and it's not the way the Constitution, since the Constitution specifically says taxes and tariffs are with Congress. And the only exception would be if this were a true emergency. It's not a true emergency, and then they'll have to recoup the money, give the money back, and that's no big deal. Administratively, that's not the U.S. Supreme Court's problem, that it will be a little difficult to give the money back. The people who have the good claims, Mark, will make their claims. They're keeping good records, and they'll get their money back. Will we consumers get our money back? No. We consumers are probably going to get screwed, but then again, it's the Trump administration. We consumers are getting screwed almost every day.
Just,
with the things
right, just to add it to all the other things you're being screwed on. Yeah, the idea that it is not underpinned by facts, the tariffs. I mean, I think that's demonstrably true. Your notion about the Supreme Court and the way they're going, I mean, I would never argue with you. You know these justices and the way they go so well. I would just say that when I see something like from a Clarence Thomas, who I understand is a true believer, where he was saying in the last week or so, I was going to get to this, but we're kind of way over time, that he's not a believer necessarily. Is it stare decisis? Is that the, in precedent, like we don't have to always rule with a precedent, which is a fundamental tenet of the Supreme Court. The idea is, we don't need to respect precedent because that's, after all, just a concoction of one person's opinion. That was essentially what Clarence Thomas said. When you're dealing with that kind of court that are kind of reverse engineering judgments, I'm going to somehow uphold the president's tariffs, and I just have to figure out a way that I can even speciously allow the law to support it. I don't know. I think that maybe the tariffs survive.
Well, that's what we are going to see what happens, Mark.
This is pros versus Joes. Katz, you're the pro and I'm the Joe. We'll see.
You and I disagree without being disagreeable. I just want to say, with these debates that I've had, like on News Nation and Fox, when they allow a debate, you were talking about the Heritage Foundation, right? I think I've debated 3 or 4 top people at the Heritage Foundation and Lewandowski. Lewandowski's been one of my debate.
What?
He's an attack dog, and he's really good in those forums. So good for you.
Yeah, I think I won that debate.
No, I believe it. No, I believe it. You're good. I've seen all your stuff, and it's really, really good. Well, we'll see. I hope you're right. Of course, you bring an optimism. I bring the opposite. But I really hope that your vision of America's future is the one that prevails. Find him on Fox News Channel, on News Nation, and here on Thursdays. And he is playing a hot hand, a pretty good streak going. The great counselor, David Katz. See you, David.
Great to be with you. Take care.
Yeah, really enjoy it, my friend. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.